Today, let's talk about Gremlins, a hit from the 1980s that the studio hoped would become a long-running franchise. But due to several mistakes made during the production of the sequel, that never happened. The script for Gremlins was written in the early 1980s by Chris Columbus, who was a complete unknown at the time. Later, he went on to direct Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and many other well-known films. But at the beginning of his career, all he had was a rough draft of a script about weird creatures attacking a small American town. Naturally, no one was interested in a script by a novice screenwriter, and most Hollywood studios slammed their doors in Columbus's face. No one saw any potential in it. But then, he was unexpectedly contacted by Steven Spielberg. Steven wasn't a huge fan of the script, but he liked the main concept. Originally, Columbus's script was much darker and didn't resemble a family comedy at all. The Gremlins brutally attacked everyone in their path. The protagonist's mother got her head torn off, and the mailman was ripped apart simply because nobody likes mailmen. Even McDonald's wasn't spared. The Gremlins ate the customers along with their meals, since those people weren't quick enough to run. Spielberg didn't like any of that, and immediately asked Columbus to tone down the violence. He believed the film should be aimed at families, the same people who actually go to McDonald's. So tearing someone's head off just because they liked fast food was out of the question. Spielberg made several more changes to Columbus's script. The design of Gizmo, as well as the idea of having a good gremlin in the story, were both his contributions. In the original version, Gizmo was the most dangerous gremlin, and the main character spent the entire film fighting him. Since the movie still needed some scary scenes, Spielberg brought in director Joe Dante, who had previously worked on The Howling. By 1983, it had been 3 years since The Howling came out, and after a couple of flops, Dante was willing to work for food. That's why when Spielberg called him personally, Dante was stunned and thought Spielberg must have dialed the wrong number. He couldn't believe anyone would want to work with him. Later, Spielberg admitted that after watching The Howling, he knew he wanted to work with Dante when the opportunity came. Spielberg said he had 2 directors in mind, Joe Dante and Tim Burton. He chose Dante because Burton didn't have any feature film experience yet, and he was worried that hiring an inexperienced director might lead to problems that could affect the final product. The projected budget for Gremlins was $7 to $8 million. No one expected it to become a major box office hit. The studio just needed a modest movie they could release during the holiday season, so Spielberg tried to cut costs wherever possible. For example, Joe Dante and Chris Columbus considered Emilio Estevez for the lead role, but Spielberg insisted on hiring Zach Galligan, who was ready to work for a bag of chips. However, when filming began, the budget still had to be increased, even though Warner Brothers had only agreed to provide the bare minimum. That happened because they couldn't use monkeys in gremlin costumes as originally planned, and the puppets were extremely expensive. Each one cost between $30,000 and $40,000. According to actor Zach Galligan, the studio's security checked everyone leaving the set and even inspected every car. The crew loved the animatronic gremlins so much that they kept trying to sneak them off the lot to show their friends and family. Test audiences responded positively to the film, with one major complaint: it was too long. The first version director Joe Dante submitted was 2.5 hours long, so during post-production, the studio simply cut it down to 1 hour and 50 minutes. The studio had so much faith in Gremlins that they pushed the release date from December 1983 to June 1984 at the last moment. Many believe that a December release would have made the film even more successful, since in 1983 all of Gremlins' family-friendly competitors flopped and ended up getting Golden Raspberry nominations. As a result, the box office was dominated by adult-oriented films, and families had nothing to watch. But Gremlins hit theaters in the summer of 1984, on the same day as another big hit, Ghostbusters. The 2 movies went head-to-head from day one, with Gremlins falling just $1 million short of Ghostbusters in its opening weekend. By the end of its US run, the $11 million film had grossed $148 million domestically. A year later, Gremlins got a limited re-release in the US, adding another $5 million to its total. Its international release brought in another $60 million. That means the movie's worldwide box office topped $213 million. But the film wasn't without controversy. Gremlins was heavily criticized by the very family audience it was targeting. Many parents felt the movie was too scary for 5 or 6-year-old kids, and argued it shouldn't have been marketed as a family film. Most of the blame fell on the director, who was criticized for the poor lighting in some scenes that made the movie feel like a horror film. The director responded by saying that the use of darkness wasn't meant to terrify children, it was done to hide the puppet's flaws, which were too obvious in bright light. It's believed that the PG-13 rating, introduced in 1984, was created because of Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which hit theaters a month before Gremlins. Before that, the ratings board could only assign either a PG or an R rating, and since these movies didn't quite qualify for an R, the board had to give them a PG. The sequels to Gremlins and Indiana Jones were both rated PG-13. Although the creators of Critters denied accusations of plagiarism, claiming their script was written before Gremlins premiered, people still accused them of trying to cash in on the success of Joe Dante's film. These claims were fueled by New Line Cinema, which promoted Critters as Gremlins from space. But since Critters' box office performance was nowhere near Gremlins, Warner Brothers never made any official statements. Warner Brothers started talking about a sequel while the first Gremlins was still playing in theaters. After all, a sequel could be made without much trouble or any forced plot twist, but problems came out of nowhere. None of the original creators wanted to return for the second film. Spielberg was busy with Back to the Future and Chris Columbus's new script, The Goonies, so he didn't have time for Gremlins. Columbus, meanwhile, was already preparing for his directorial debut with Adventures in Babysitting and wasn't interested in coming back. Director Joe Dante's career was also taking off. After Gremlins, he was flooded with offers and quickly signed on to 2 big-budget films, Explorers and Inner Space. He turned down the offer to direct the sequel, so Warner had to develop it entirely on their own. With no one at the helm, the project stalled for several years. The studio went through nearly 10 different scripts for Gremlins 2 and considered over 100 ideas. At one point, the story almost took place in the future, with Gremlins causing chaos in a Martian colony. The idea that came closest to being realized had the Gremlins taking over Las Vegas. As the sequel stalled, Joe Dante's career began to falter. His films Explorers and Inner Space were major flops, and his only moderate success during that time was The Burbs with Tom Hanks. In 1989, Dante finally agreed to return to Gremlins, but only on the condition that he'd have full creative control and a much larger budget. Warner Brothers agreed to all of his demands. Steven Spielberg also returned, though he later admitted he devoted much less time to the project because of other commitments. As for Columbus, the studio couldn't bring him back to work on the script. At the time, he was fully immersed in Home Alone. According to Dante, once the studio was left without the original creators, they simply had no idea what to do with Gremlins. None of the executives even liked the first film. They didn't understand why it had been so successful and had no clue how to approach the sequel. He said they were rolling in money after the first movie and just wanted someone to recreate that success. Later, in an interview, Dante admitted he didn't want to do the sequel because he felt the story was already complete. He eventually agreed only because the studio offered him a ton of money, and he knew he might never get another chance to make such a big movie without any outside interference. That's largely why the second film pokes fun at the first one. It includes many references to how the original was received and even mocks its PG rating. According to the director, the studio wasn't expecting that level of boldness and was a bit shocked when they saw the footage. Dante even reached out to Sylvester Stallone to ask for permission to include a Rambo reference. Although it wasn't necessary for parody, he felt it was the right thing to do, and Stallone gave his approval without hesitation. During post-production, the film once again ran into issues and was cut down. On top of that, Steven Spielberg removed several scenes featuring the Gremlins. He felt there were too many of them, and that the humans needed more screen time. To make sure audiences knew this film wasn't scary at all, Warner Brothers added their animated characters to the very beginning. They wanted to make it clear Gremlins 2 was a family-friendly movie. The film hit theaters in June 1990. 6 years after the original's release. The budget for Joe Dante's film was $50 million, a significant amount at the time. The director was very unhappy with the US release date of Gremlins 2. It landed right in the middle of a box office bloodbath. Theaters were already showing Pretty Woman, Bird on a Wire, Total Recall, Back to the Future Part 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the sequel to 48 Hours. All of these movies were doing great and pulling in major profits. Because the market was oversaturated with big hits, the sequel's opening weekend revenue was lower than that of the original, even though its budget was 5 times larger. By the end of its US run, the film had earned only $41 million. As mentioned earlier, the first movie made $153 million. The international box office added another $30 million, but that still wasn't enough to recoup the $50 million budget. On top of that, the film faced harsh criticism for its blatant product placement, by the standards of that time. The press wrote that the sequel was made only to sell as many toys as possible. Later, Warner's Batman and Robin would be criticized for the same reason. Joe Dante believes the main reason for the huge failure was the long gap between the releases. Audiences had simply gotten tired of waiting 6 years, and many fans of the first film had grown up and lost interest in Gremlins. In the end, the studio canceled the planned third film, even though they had removed Gizmo's water protection suit at the end of the second movie to set it up. There's no information on how well the toys sold after the sequel, but it's known that by the late 1990s, Gremlins' success had far exceeded that of Furby, which many believe was inspired by them. Joe Dante's career never fully recovered after Gremlins 2. After the sequel, his films flopped one after another. In the late 1990s, he had a chance at a comeback. Once again working with producer Steven Spielberg, Dante directed the big-budget Small Soldiers for DreamWorks. Many expected it to replicate the success of Gremlins and launch a new franchise. But again, Dante blamed the studio, saying they cut several great scenes and removed many explosions to secure a PG rating. Despite all that, the film still failed to earn a PG. As a result, no one knew who the movie was really made for. Young kids weren't allowed to see it, and adults thought it was too childish. In the mid-2010s, Warner Bros. Announced plans to reboot Gremlins. A little later, Chris Columbus, attached as screenwriter, said the film wouldn't be a reboot, but a continuation of the first 2 movies with a darker storyline. The main idea of the new film was to eliminate Gizmo as the main source of all the Gremlin-related problems. Although the project hasn't been officially cancelled, there's been no news in recent years. It's quite possible the script will be rewritten again, or that the film won't happen at all. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.